In 1585, England pushed into the edge of the Atlantic world with a small, uncertain move, a foothold on Roanoke Island, off the coast of what later became North Carolina. This was not a full colony yet. It was an experiment meant to test the land, watch the coastline, and prove England could hold ground far from home. But from the start, distance ruled everything. The people who landed there depended on ships for tools, food, and news. If those ships failed to return, the outpost did not just struggle, it simply ran out of options. Roanoke offered no existing English farms, no nearby English towns, and no reliable system for rescue. Every decision had to assume the ocean could cut them off at any moment. That vulnerability shaped the settlement more than any plan on paper. So, the first English presence on Roanoke stood on a thin margin between ambition and collapse. It required steady supplies, steady leadership, and steady luck. 3 things the Atlantic did not promise. What England planted in 1585 looked like a beginning, but it also carried a quiet warning. This place could be abandoned as easily as it was started. The experiment moved forward anyway, and the stakes only grew. In 1587, the plan changed in a way that raised the stakes overnight. John White arrived at Roanoke with a new group of English settlers, and this time they came as families, not just men on an assignment. They brought the idea of a real community, people meant to live, work, and grow old there. That decision reshaped everything. A temporary foothold became a permanent bet. White did not just lead them, he governed them, responsible for order, food, and relations with the surrounding world. The colonists set about rebuilding and organizing, treating the settlement like a town that needed to function day after day. Every task mattered more because children needed stability and parents needed predictability. There was no simple option to pack up and leave. Commitment replaced experimentation. Then came a moment that showed just how permanent this was meant to be. A baby was born in the colony, Virginia Dare, marking the first English child known to have been born in the Americas. It was more than a family milestone. It was a statement of intent. This place was supposed to last, and once people started building lives, the cost of failure became unthinkable. John White left Roanoke because the colony needed food, tools, and more people if it had any chance to last. The plan sounded simple: cross the Atlantic, gather supplies, and return quickly. But that promise depended on timing and cooperation an ocean away. As soon as White reached England, control slipped from his hands. The colony's survival suddenly depended on decisions made in a country facing bigger threats. England turned toward war with Spain, and ships that might have carried provisions got pulled into military duty. Sailors, weapons, and money all went to defense first. White tried to secure a voyage back, but approvals and preparations dragged on. Every delay in England created a new problem in Roanoke. A few weeks became months, then more time passed, and the resupply mission stopped feeling like a return trip and started feeling like an absence. White faced setbacks that kept stacking up, ships diverted, plans interrupted, departures cancelled. The Atlantic crossing itself stayed dangerous, and even when vessels moved, they did not move for Roanoke. Meanwhile, no one in England could see the colony's daily struggle, and no message came from across the ocean to force urgency. By the time White finally found a path back, the settlers had lived through years with no help. The lifeline had snapped. In 1590, John White finally made it back across the Atlantic. He expected relief and reunion. Instead, he reached the settlement and found no people at all. The houses still stood, but the colony itself had vanished. There were no fresh signs of panic, no clear trail of a fight, and no bodies left behind. After years of delay, the moment he feared arrived all at once. The town was simply empty. White searched for some kind of message because he needed one basic fact: where they went. Then he saw it, letters cut into wood. On a post, the word Croatoan appeared, carved plainly enough to read. On a nearby tree, only CRO was cut, as if the writer stopped early or ran out of time. This was not a random mark. It looked like a deliberate signal, and it was the only clear clue he had. Those carved words changed everything. Until then, the story was about a struggling community waiting for supplies. Now it became a disappearance with a single, cryptic lead. Croatoan pointed toward a nearby place and a nearby people, but it did not explain why the colonists left, whether they left together or whether they left under pressure. White had returned to save them. Instead, he carried away a mystery that refused to resolve. After the empty palisade and the carved words, the next question sounded simple. Where did everyone go? But the years kept passing and no rescue ship brought answers. Later, English visitors looked for survivors along the coast, asking native communities, checking waterways, and scanning for any trace of a camp. What they collected instead were fragments, second-hand stories, vague directions, and guesses that grew into competing explanations. One explanation sounded almost practical. The settlers might have joined nearby communities to survive, blending in through marriage and daily life until they no longer counted as English at all. Reports circulated of native people with lighter eyes or unfamiliar words, and every rumour fed the idea of assimilation. But other accounts pointed the opposite way. Some colonists claimed a sudden attack wiped the settlement out, turning silence into evidence of violence. Then came the explanations that left no clear trail. Disease could have moved faster than any enemy, leaving graves unmarked and survivors scattered. Famine could have forced a desperate relocation inland, away from the shore and away from searchers. Each theory leaned on the same thin clues, and each group of colonists repeated the version that fit what they feared or needed to believe. A debate started early and it never really ended. In the 1700s and 1800s, the map of America kept stretching. People pushed into new territory and towns appeared fast because they had to. A river crossing turned into a landing. A wagon road turned into a main street. Courts, churches, and taverns followed the traffic. It felt permanent because it looked busy. But these places depended on movement. When the movement changed, the town's reason for existing weakened. Trade routes shifted for practical reasons, not mystery. A new road bypassed an older one. A canal opened, then later a railroad line chose a different stop. Merchants and travellers went where time and money were saved. A town that once sat at the centre suddenly sat on the edge. Shops closed first, then the post office. Families that had arrived for opportunity packed up and left because staying no longer paid. Resources did the same thing to settlements. A good stretch of soil ran out, a nearby forest got cut down, or game and grazing land declined. Politics also redrew the future. County seats moved, borders changed, and a new courthouse or state road pulled business away. The vanishing looked quieter than Roanoke, but the result matched it. A name faded from use, buildings got taken apart, and a town disappeared through decisions made elsewhere. In the late 1800s, a new kind of town rose fast and hard. because it did not begin with families looking for farmland. It began with a deposit in the ground or a stand of trees worth money. A mine opened, a logging company moved in, or a railroad chose a spot to service trains. Workers followed, stores, saloons, and boarding houses appeared. The town existed for one purpose: extraction. That single purpose made these places powerful and fragile. When ore prices fell, when a vein ran out, when a mill closed, the payroll stopped. Timber camps shifted as nearby hills were cut over. Railroads rerouted lines or consolidated stops to save time and cost. People did not debate whether to stay. They left because the reason to be there vanished. A busy main street could thin out in a season. The speed of the collapse rewrote what disappeared meant in American history. A town did not need war or mystery to empty out. It only needed an economy built like a fuse, short, bright, and then done. Buildings were moved, stripped or burned for materials, records scattered with the workers, maps kept the name for a while, then stopped. In many cases, the land stayed, but the town ceased to exist. In the 20th century, some towns did not fade out. They got erased on purpose. The federal government backed huge engineering projects that promised electricity, flood control, and reliable water, and those promises carried a price. Valleys filled with farms and main streets sat right where new reservoirs needed to go. Surveyors measured. Maps got redrawn. Then orders went out and whole communities started preparing to leave. This kind of vanishing left paperwork instead of riddles. Land got condemned, homes got bought out, and cemeteries sometimes got moved with official records to match. Families relocated in stages, not overnight, but the result still looked like a disappearance from the outside. Once the dam closed and the water rose, roads ended at the shoreline. Storefronts, bridges, and foundations went under, preserved and hidden in plain sight. Other towns disappeared for national security, not water. During wartime and the Cold War, the government drew boundaries for bombing ranges, weapons plants, and training grounds, and people inside them had to go. Entire place names vanished from signs and maps, replaced by restricted zones and guard posts. What had once sounded like a mystery now became a documented relocation. The town still vanished, only the reasons changed. By the late 1900s, the old disappearances stopped being just stories passed down. They became investigations again. Archaeologists returned to places like Roanoke with stricter methods and clearer goals, find what the first searchers could not. At the same time, archivists dug through shipping logs, maps, land grants, and court files, stitching together timelines that had once been broken. The mystery narrowed, but it did not close. New tools changed what counted as a clue. Remote sensing located soil changes without turning a shovel. Ground-penetrating radar suggested buried features where no buildings stood anymore. Computer mapping lined up old drawings with modern coastlines and revealed how shorelines shifted and swallowed sites. Across the country, the same approach redrew forgotten towns that had faded from memory, fixing their real footprints on the map. Evidence surfaced, then raised new questions. Each lead promised a finish line, and each one stopped short. A fragment of pottery hinted at contact, but not at who moved where. A cluster of nails suggested a structure, but not the reason it vanished. Records pointed toward relocations, storms, or slow absorption into nearby communities, yet they rarely pinned down names, dates, and motives all at once. The modern era revived the cold cases. It still failed to deliver a final answer. Today, Roanoke still sat at the top of America's list of vanished places, not because it stood alone, but because it left so little behind. Other towns faded for clear reasons and on written schedules. Roanoke did not. It ended with a few carved letters and then nothing that settled the argument. That gap kept it famous. The mystery stayed simple to ask and hard to close. Meanwhile, countless other lost settlements got tracked step by step. Ruins marked where streets once ran. Old maps matched up with property lines. Census lists showed who arrived, who left, and when the numbers dropped. Newspaper archives locked dates to fires, floods, closures, and relocations. Even when a town died quietly, the paper trail usually spoke. The disappearance became a timeline, not a riddle. That difference defined the modern era. History became searchable. Online databases connected records that once sat in separate rooms. Digital reconstructions let people rebuild vanished towns from photos, surveys, and land deeds, often down to individual buildings. The public could follow the evidence from home and watch a place reappear in data. Roanoke still resisted that treatment. In 1590, the silence stayed total.